anyone who's interested in translation at a professional or community level. Part of my own vision for this society comes from my own experience as a freelance translator, having just graduated from a really exceptional, undergraduate program in Chinese, where I honed my language skills. I knew that I wanted to be a language professional, but I didn't really have a blueprint, and I was kind of there's a lot of trial and error, I'll say, and my approach to like getting jobs and even doing translation work itself was kind of like throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck. So in that time, through my own experience and also through being at Hunter for a semester in this program, I've gained a lot of knowledge. I've amassed a ton of resources and I want to have a space where I can share it with my colleagues and where we can come together, we can give each other advice, ask each other questions, support each other. It's really important for me to kind of carve out that kind of community. Which brings me to my final point. So the officers of the society have been working hard on creating a website. We have already created several pages for translation resources in Chinese, Arabic, Spanish, and Russian for all translation students to access and collaborate on, and we'll be keeping you updated, but I hope to publish that website in the next 2 weeks. And now I'll turn it over to the student panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Novella. I think Julie wants to say some words a little bit here. Julie, if you don't mind.
Yes. So thank you. Just to congratulate you, really. Good morning and welcome, and thank you to everyone here for joining us in the inauguration of the Hunter Translation Society. And my heartiest congratulations to our first cohort of students who have come together and nominated and voted for the students today. And of course, congratulations particularly to the office bearers, Anna Tupash, Tanya Reese, Sol Salazar, and Rachel Delgado. Welcome on board. Also, my thanks once again, as always, to my colleagues, all faculty involved with MATI and in and around MATI for your advising and inspiring the students and rallying support every step of the way. As you know, the Hunter Master's Program in Translation launched just last fall in the thick of the pandemic. We're still in our first year. So it is with incredible initiative, hard work, and a great deal of, I will say, tech savvy, which I don't have, that the students have pulled this together in a matter of weeks, right, to constitute the Hunter Society, Translation Society. So, just thinking about this last night, the expression "come on board," it's such a cliche in English, meaning to join an organization, to take on, certain offices. And of course, today we're here to inaugurate and to officiate this. But it has its roots in the idea of getting on a ship, on a train, going on a journey. In direct translation in Chinese, we say 上船, which literally means, get on the boat. But actually in Chinese, because of a, sort of a criminal mindset, usually we say 上贼船, to get on the piracy ship, So that, of course, is in jest, right? There's a sense in which, you come on with a shared mission. You're not alone. You can lean on others and others on you, right? And that idea that even if the venture is a little naughty or, it comes with an element of risk, right? We're all in this together. So seriously, in our academic and professional life, when we say come on board, of course, what is implied is not just getting on a vehicle, but making a commitment to be part of a discipline, a practice where we're accountable to others, to protecting our shared interests, and to a consensus of standards of ethics and of values. So today, as we gather to celebrate the Hunter Translation Society, I think we're also celebrating this field of translation and interpreting, particularly in and around the East Coast and the New York area. And we are all strengthened with the addition of the Hunter Society, Translation Society. And so I think we should congratulate ourselves. Congratulations to all. So with that, as the panelists get ready, I think we can turn this back over to, I think it's Rachel who's moderating, right?
Yeah, I am. Thank you so much, Jill. Thank you so much. So yeah, we're gonna start right now with the panel. The first person who's gonna talk today is gonna be Rebecca Kirk. She's the executive officer of the Hunter Translation Society. She joined the MATI program in the fall of 2020, and she is in the Russian track. Today, she will be talking about COVID impact on translation interpretation industry. Thank you so much. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's symposium. We're very, very excited for y'all to be here. Please excuse the noise that is happening outside. There's apparently a racetrack out there. But like I said, welcome to the first symposium. My name is Rebecca, Becky, and I am in the Russian track in the MATI program. And I'm very excited that MATI is a thing that was created at Hunter. It's very, very exciting. It's exciting that we are gaining this training in translation and interpretation, especially during times like this, during COVID, when translation and interpretation is needed really more than ever. Because unfortunately, there's still a lot of communities within the US which doesn't have an official language. There is still huge, really disappointing disparities in language services for many, many language communities. And although, according to the US 2020 census, 99% of US households were able to respond in their language, and 59 non-English language materials were available in video and audio forms for people to utilize, there's still a big deficit in this. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, and kind of connecting it to the big question of today's symposium, which is, where do we go from here? What does the future look like for translation and interpretation during COVID, post-COVID? And I don't have the answer to that. I don't think anyone has the answer to that, and will not have the answer to that for a very long time. But I think what we're trying to get at today, especially, is giving some hope, giving some options, and just things that we know, things that we've noticed from our own personal standpoint, and from our distinguished professors' standpoints that they can offer. And we're very excited to really discuss this and give our input for it. And how companies and LSPs, which are language service providers, can move forward digitally to provide translators and interpreters more materials and more access to do what we do best, which is help bridge language barriers between different communities. So that's a very brief introduction just to kind of what we're going to be talking about today, and our goals for today and just generally for the future. So I will send it right back to Rachel, and thank you for listening to me.
No, thank you so much. That's great. It's always a pleasure hearing you. That was very interesting. Now I'm going to introduce to Tania, please. She's our vice president. She's on the Chinese track, and this is her second semester in the program. She has worked in both profit and nonprofit, nonprofit and private sectors. Sorry about that. And she utilizing her Chinese skills. Today she'll be speaking about language rights and national security. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And again, thanks everyone for coming. We're truly so excited to just share some interesting discussion and hopefully stimulate this discussion to provide some insight and interesting information regarding, for me, I'll talk about language rights and national security, some things that I find personally interesting. And this all started when I decided to study Mandarin Chinese in undergraduate school. I was actually studying with Annabella in something called the Language Flagship, which hopefully we'll hear a bit about later from one of our honored guests being here today. But let's start off with language rights. And I think it's important to highlight some fundamental things that we gather from our US Constitution and our legal system that's very unique to our country, which is, to start off, we don't have an official language. States do have their own official languages if they decide to enforce something like a US English standard, but federally we do not. So when we're thinking of civil rights and we're thinking about language rights, all of this is a very recent discussion, and sort of during the same time as civil rights in the 60s and 70s, that's when we started seeing the development of language justice and accessibility for non-English speakers. You had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that protected individuals through intentional discrimination on the basis of language when it's clearly a form of national origin discrimination. And as a common law system in the US, we rely heavily on precedent. So it's very limited in the area of language rights because it's still a very new concept in that sense for our legal system. Courts and legal systems are not only more recently addressing the issues raised in language diversity, like in the 1970s, there was a special help mandate for language minority students in public schools. Think of like your TESOL programs that have been implemented nationally and regionally. Bilingual voting rights were established at the same time English literacy tests were abolished. And then, so that was the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And then non-English speaking defendants were guaranteed the service of a translator. And this is just the public sector. So this is just to sort of start the discussion. There's so much more that also happens in the private sector that shows its own initiative and growth in language services. But just to think about, that is the foundation in the United States. And then when we're thinking about language rights in a COVID era, it's important to remember why those are fundamental rights that we're trying to adhere to. At the beginning of COVID-19, the public health emergency, it was clear that civil rights were not to be suspended or waived in times of disaster. And there, on a micro level, you saw a lot, especially in New York City, of non-English speaking patients who may have been subject to delays and miscalculations in healthcare facilities, in part because physicians struggle to communicate with them and accessibility is limited. And then on a macro scale, it's important to have language services publicly, because it's not just so that individuals are informed when they're between patient and doctor, but it enables mass cooperation when you're trying to curb the spread. So thinking about the importance of language rights for the society as a whole, back to the foundation of why we have those as protected rights in this country in the first place, is just food for thought. And so the other thing is, if you're thinking about language rights and technology during the COVID era, an increase in access to language services also depends on your accessibility to technology, which is a huge question that we're still trying to answer these days, is how do you increase that accessibility when it varies across the population. So it's also serving as a barrier to justice. But to move on and take a hard turn, when you're thinking about accessibility, you're thinking about who's in this industry and when do they start? And there is actually a very limited number of Americans that study critical languages. When you're thinking of critical languages, it would be Persian, Chinese, Farsi, Somalian, Russian, Arabic, and it could go on. And you would think of this as a hiring conundrum. If hiring in the private may be a little bit easier than public, because when you're hiring for the state, especially at the federal level, you want college educated Americans that can reach a certain proficiency, but they may not qualify for federal government work. It's the issue of recruiting people who can speak these critical languages, and have spent their time in the United States and are able to get through what they call a full scope background investigation. And that's very difficult when you're coming from a heritage or a native community and you have a lot of ties to family who may be overseas, or if you've traveled a lot overseas. So you have these barriers to entry that are high for public, and you have these demands for these languages. So we have a sort of a deficit in some of these critical languages currently, but there's been like huge initiatives for almost 2 decades now, with programs like Star Talk, flagship colleges like the one that I attended at Hunter College, fellowships through Boren, critical language scholarships. The state has definitely taken the initiative to increase the amount of students, American students, who have an affordable accessibility to these languages, but that talent pool is still limited. And that could directly impact the national security of the country, because you have a government and a nation at risk of misunderstanding a foreign threat. When you're having the, like I mentioned, with COVID-19 and mass cooperation, you also have a language communication issue if you don't have accessibility in all these languages. And luckily, like Rebecca was speaking on the census, there are definitely increases when you see 59 languages covered on the census, but that's just for one specific thing that the government provides, but it's in the right direction. So this is just sort of getting you thinking about like language technology of the day, and in general, how these things are developing. So we have a desperate need for these translators and interpreters. The language technology of today, we see huge developments in natural language processing, deep learning, and like, despite the really cool concepts of augmented intelligence and machine translation, it is not at a current level that would function, that you could use for national security purposes. So despite having these wonderful language technological developments, it doesn't have the cognitive skills to process foreign language at the way you would need to for that kind of intel. So we still have this huge demand. And then when you see that shift in real and perceived threats, it really started in the 90s, and it's increased in demand since then. So this is a sharp increase due to that insufficient proficiency of the language workforce, that compromised foreign nationals and civilian immigrants and citizen immigrants. Contracted work is only so many that you can provide in that field. And we need to consider, how are we going to build an organic civilian and military language workforce of translators, interpreters, negotiators, and language analysts to serve the needs of the state, to protect the citizens, to allow for accessibility, and enable mass cooperation, especially during a time of COVID-19. So I hope that raised a lot more questions and gave you more things to consider. And I'm going to yield my time and pass it back to Rachel. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was really interesting. Right now, I'm just gonna introduce our final speaker. She is Sol Salazar. She's the treasurer of our Hunter Translation Society. And she joined the program this spring, just like me, 2021, after graduating from her bachelor's degree in translation interpretation, Spanish to English, with a minor in theater. She will be speaking about translation and business. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rachel, for the introduction. Can everybody hear me well?
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. So as Rachel was saying, I will speaking on the intersection of business, COVID-19, and translation and interpretation. And although business is not my expertise or major, it has been an interesting topic for me to delve into during the past months, because after the industry I worked in for more than a decade completely vanished due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As with my case, countless people and organizations running businesses found themselves unable to sell their products or provide their services. And they suddenly had to reinvent everything they had done until then. Even the businesses that weren't as affected had to reassess what parts of their old models to keep and which ones to leave behind. And if there's one thing that they all tried to do, was to go as virtual as they could. This has opened a lot of doors for translators and interpreters, because as numerous companies decided to get rid of their offices, and as remote organizational strategies mature, many of these companies are expanding their international footprint, and in an attempt to take advantage of the fact that the world has become much more virtual. For many of these companies to pivot and stay competitive, they may need to venture into geographic or cultural areas that they had not even considered before. In this case, being involved in global markets or local markets that target global cultures means the need for fluency in language and culture. And that is exactly what we do. As translators and interpreters, we are mediators across cultures. We do not only transfer the meaning of words from one language into the other, but we are also involved in activities like localization, which deals with adapting products and services to be functional and appealing across linguistic and cultural barriers. Transcreation, which deals with achieving engagement with foreign audiences on an emotional level. Search engine optimization, which deals with optimizing content so that search engines like Google will rank it higher on search result pages. Also audio and visual services and even cultural consulting. Now, businesses are able to get these services through other businesses called language service companies, which means that the translators and interpreters employed by these companies are also part of the current physical to virtual transition, but they have an advantage. Most translators and interpreters, perhaps more so translators, have been required to do their job using technology for many years before this pandemic. They already know how to effectively implement online remote components to their work, making them even more valuable to the business industry. Moreover, translators and interpreters do not only work for language service companies, they also freelance. This means that more often than not, a translator or interpreter is also an entrepreneur. Which brings me to another aspect of COVID-19. This crisis has sparked a wave of innovation and has launched a generation of entrepreneurs. I found that in the US, 75% of millionaires are self-made, which means they did not receive any inheritance at all from their parents or other family members. And they also grew up in lower middle class families. According to Forbes, more than half of these people are entrepreneurs who started their own businesses in their 20s or their early 30s. Therefore, to be professionally trained in a language career that will compel me to be creative and start my own business in a country made for entrepreneurs, a country that is becoming only more diverse and that is becoming aware of its imperative need for language services, seems like a great move. In addition, US News and World Report ranked translation and interpreting as #1 of their list of best creative and media jobs of 2020. The list is determined by salary, job market, future growth, stress, and work-life balance. If that tickles your curiosity as much as it tickles mine, I will leave you with the list of languages projected to be trending in business. These are simplified Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, Brazilian, Portuguese, Indonesian, Japanese, Russian, French, and German. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Sol. That was really interesting. Happy to see the Spanish is gonna be there rocking in the business. Yeah. So right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unpin us all and I'm gonna be pinning the professors from the student faculty panel who gonna be talking today. We're very
Rachel,
excited.
I think we may have some time for questions, for one round of questions, perhaps.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be
for
great.
particular student speakers.
Sure. That would be great. If you have any questions, like you hope you want to ask to us about the topics that we've been talking about, that we'll answer them. You can type them. You can unmute yourself. You can talk. You can type it in the chat, and if not, I would just pin the faculty members. And
I have a question.
To ask a question to Tanya.
All right. I'll mute.
Hi, Tanya. I was very interested in your talk. I was wondering, how do local communities know about the services, whether it's translation or interpretation, that are available to them? What does the state of New York do to reach out to these communities? Thank you for your question, Julia. So from what limited research I was doing is that you have like the WHO and the HHS office, that they have their own sort of virtual presence that allow for communities to understand this. You also have local community nonprofits that have created their sort of own outreach programs to make sure that these resources reach these at-risk communities or minority communities. But when it comes to specifically what the City of New York is doing, I'm actually in the upstate New York area at this time. So I'm not personally in the region to see what that's like. If someone else would like to speak to that, perhaps, Annabella?
Add a little bit. I a few years ago during when I was an undergraduate student, I interned at the Department of Transportation in what they had, a language access unit. I'm not sure if that unit still exists, but I do know that Bloomberg developed an initiative for like city governments to, publish language materials. So in that, for the DOT where I was, any flyers that went out, all of like the, every year the DOT prints these huge maps, truck maps, bike maps. We had to translate all of those into, I think we did Russian, Chinese, and Spanish. At the time I was living in the Chinatown in Brooklyn, near a little south of Sunset Park. And it was really cool because we would also translate, just like flyers. So like, if you're dropping your kid off at the school bus, but the school bus isn't going to be on that road that day, you need to have a sign. Or if, you can't use this sidewalk, you need to have a sign. And I would see the work that we would do in the community, which was great. And I think there are similar initiatives at the Department of Education and other city governments. So I do know that, but that was a few years ago. I'm not sure what's happening at the moment.
I think that health information that goes out to various communities is very often published in various languages of the city. And of course, when you get your information about voting, that is also done in various languages, most prominent in the city. Now I have to show my face. Yeah, so, but my question to whoever wants to answer it, and maybe you don't know the answers, is in this period of pandemic, there are some populations who are not computer savvy, who cannot even make an appointment to be vaccinated because it's so difficult. And usually these are older people, and usually these are people whose native language is not English. So in this climate, to reach those people is a huge challenge. And I think that this is something that should be addressed in whichever way. I'm not sure exactly. Perhaps our translators or emerging translators should be in touch with the City Hall or write to the governor about this situation.
I just want to pick up on the language issue at City Hall, and Bloomberg was mentioned. When Bloomberg became mayor, he early on in his administration, maybe the first month, he announced that he wanted all city documents to be translated into all the languages spoken in the city. And then all the translation agencies went berserk because he wasn't aware that there are about 100 languages spoken by the residents of New York. And that was explained to him because simply there aren't enough translators, there aren't trained translators in all the 100 languages. So they narrowed it down to the top 10. And that still stands. And all city documents are translated into the top 10 languages all the time, but that applies to official documents. But the situation since then, the situation has improved considerably, and including hospitals. So for example, if you go to hospitals, you will see that a lot of the signage is in many languages. I will say something about the COVID situation later when I present, but that's what Bloomberg did for improving the language access, official language access in the city.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me a minute, I just pinned, I'm sorry, Natty, I'm sorry. I just pinned right now, Kenneth Losh, he's the major in the office. Probably he can just add something to the discussion. We'll be happy to hear him.
Hi, thank you. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Ken Lowe.
Hi.
I'm actually from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And first of all, just congratulations on this event. I've met Julie at a American Translator Association meeting a while back, and so we're very happy to see this come about. So I work on language access at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. It's a relatively small unit, but just to piggyback on what several of you have mentioned, including Tanya's comments about like the evolution of language access on a federal level, the New York City has its own history on trying to improve language access. Under Mayor Bloomberg, it was mentioned that there was an executive order, EO 120, in 2008 that identified 6 languages based on census. And just a few years ago, City Council passed the law, Local Law 30, which took that executive order and, based in part because of the federal administration at the time, tried to codify that into city law. So Local Law 30 took those 6 languages and added 4. It's based on a group of census data and DOE, Department of Education data. And it really specifies an agency's most commonly distributed documents are to be translated into the 10 languages. So, there's a lot of nuance there, but just to add that it's a really challenging issue for the city to face. I sit within a relatively small office of the mayor's office. We coordinate based on this law and through a lot of work in the past, including with the DOT that Annabelle was part of. Their language access coordinators to basically institutionalize language access and language services across the agencies. And so we deal with over 30 different agencies. It's really a challenge of organizational change and changing the mindset of how we serve New Yorkers. Local Law 30 addresses 10 languages. That accounts for about 90% of limited English proficient New Yorkers across the city, but we have such a breadth of languages that it's a challenge to do so in an effective and efficient way, especially when there are budget challenges. So working with community organizations, trying to build out pipelines for linguists is something that we're hoping to do a better job at, more opportunities, improve the way that city staff actually think about language services and become more educated clients for those services. So I don't want to go on too long, but it's part of this 20-year evolution of language access across the city ever since President Clinton signed an executive order extending civil rights and the discrimination against national origins, specifically to language access issues. And so it's something that we hope to continue working on. COVID has certainly cast a lot of these disparities into including digital and language access. But that's why I'm so happy to have hear about your program and how it seems to be going. And we want to make more opportunities available to professional linguists to work more effectively with the city.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. We were really happy that we could have a moment to listen to you and listen to all these professors that we have here in the panel. That if there is anything else to add about this topic, we'll be happy to hear about it.
I see there's a message.
Yeah, there is a message. So there is a message for Sol. Mauricio Balestra said, thank you, Ms. Salazar, for your information about going into business with languages. Can you please repeat the name of that publication, which you referred to containing a report on top of languages for business growth? Do you know what year the article was contained in?
Yes, let me get you the exact website. I got this list from like 4 or 5 different websites talking about business in COVID. But this one really helped me. It is Harry Clark, which is a company for certified translators. And the date was 2019. There's another one about 2017 in the same website. That's really helpful. And there's another website. It's another translation company, a service, language service company called Telelanguage.
Now, it would be a great idea if you could share like the.
I could write it down in the chat. Yeah.
There is also a question from Tomonori Nagano. I think it's for Kenneth Law. I don't know. It says, if I remember correctly, the city offers volunteer-based translation services, language bank or language line, for less commonly taught languages. Do they still exist? If so, can you talk more about it?
Well, there is something called the Volunteer Language Bank. It's primarily for bilingual city staff. It was a joint project between our office and NYC Service, which does coordinate volunteers in the city. It provided language proficiency testing for oral and written proficiency. And it was really a way to harness the language skills of city staff. That said, it was created a while ago, and it was really before the city became a little more aware of the need for professional language services. So, you know, I think it's as part of an evolution of how the city provided information in other languages was, you know, first, okay, how do we harness the skills that we have? But this was a set of really community-minded staff who were willing to do so without really any professional experience or training as linguists. So yes, a lot of them could do the work, but more and more we wanted to push our use of contracted professional vendors for quality, for sustainability, and as you know, as time has gone on, to use CAT tools more effectively to leverage those for consistency and for cost savings. You know, it's still a long process. There have been some efforts through our office to get volunteers to help on for some of the lesser proficient languages. Honestly, I can't say it's that robust yet, but I'd like to figure out how better to do that, because it is still a challenge for many communities because of the diversity. But that's sort of the background on the volunteer language bank.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I don't think there are more questions. Sol added in the chat. some websites where I think they refer to topics that she was talking about. So right now, if there are no more questions, I'm just gonna proceed to unpin us all. To unpin Tanya and Rebecca. Thank you so much, girls. Thank you so much. It was great. Oh, hearty congratulations to the inception of Hunter Translation Society and its wonderful inaugural symposium. One thing to think about going forward is how to keep society members engaged. Periodic newsletters in one way, and I think forum discussion is other. See if Hunter Translation Society can find a platform where members can post translations related questions and solutions. I think we can answer that question. That's just for the executive directors to think about for now. Yes, that's a great suggestion that we will take into account. We've been thinking about this project for long. We've been thinking about our blog for so long, how to design it for everybody to come together, to participate, to share our passion for translation, interpretation, and just share our points of view, help each other, a community just to come together, you know. We will be inviting you all to participate, to link with us. We're currently having the LinkedIn, where we've been having the first touches here and there with other people. We'll be having a newsletter. I take care of the email campaigns a little bit. I would be sending you all the news, all the content that we'll be posting. We'll keep you updated if you really want to. We really want to keep this going and growing bigger. We're looking forward to that. If somebody of my colleagues want to say anything.
Also, just to add on to that, Rachel already kind of brushed on it, but we will also be publishing our very own blogs on our website where we will be touching on different issues within translation and interpretation from us ourselves, the students in the MADI program, and like Rachel said, hopefully from other students from other language backgrounds as well, so that we have a very rich basis and story for everyone to access.
Yeah. There's a lot more there coming soon, for sure.
And this is not only a bridge to build with like professionals, but also for future students who really have a passion for translation. We are all students in the MACHI program, and if there is somebody here who is really interested in the program or is to develop their career professionally and just learn a little bit more about this amazing program, we're here to answer your questions. We are from Russian, Chinese, and Spanish track. So you can just reach out to any of us. And you have the email, you have the LinkedIn, you have always to reach us. We will be here to answer all your questions, whether you are trying to grow professionally or just try to study a little bit more and just, you know.
Yeah, I'll say if there are any students out there in this Zoom right now who don't necessarily want to contact a professor, although everyone's very kind and friendly, but if you want to talk to a student one-on-one, we're all more than happy to sit down and have chats and stuff. So
I think this is also a good time for students to just put in their contact information and just flag themselves for us, so that I think the executive committee, they can then follow up, and for students who are more firmly interested in joining the Translation Society. Also, I wanted to pick up, we have of course the faculty panel coming up. But just to pick up on Ken's wonderful sharing of the wonderful programs going on with the mayor's office, certainly, Ken, you and I, we should get together and figure out how the Translation Society could also get involved. And certainly in terms of community support, community service, volunteerism, and perhaps, right, as the needs will define this, where we go with this, certainly internship opportunities for students. I think that would be, you know, where we'll be heading. And yeah, society, inaugurating the society, this is, you know, of course, auspicious time for us to talk about the future and plans. I think more important than anything, and Professor Bin Liu was right, is keeping us engaged, right? And you know, it's sort of, it's not like going on board as in just taking the journey and reaching somewhere. The difference between being in a degree program and actually being part of a society is that society is an ongoing commitment, is an ongoing relationship, and is you know, an ongoing community that has no time limit to it, right? It's all up to us. So sorry,
Thank you.
Rachel.
Thank you. No, it's okay. It's fine. So right now, like, I think all the questions are done. I'm just gonna proceed to pin us all. I'm gonna pin all the faculty members. So I'm just gonna do that very quick. So we can see the faces and we can see clearly all the faculty members who we're really excited to hear about. So first of all, like, just let me do this in a bit.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, to a big thank you to the student, the panelists. Really wonderful. So today we have a faculty panel, and we're addressing a very broad thematic of change, right? How translation and interpreting as a field and as a professional practice is an evolving paradigm, and I think this also speaks very here and now immediately to where we're at, you know, which it feels like, I think, for all of us, a paradigm shift for humanity, right? So I will start. I will start off with, I think what we want to do to make sure that all the panelists are introduced, and we will that I will be posing questions specifically for each one of them, and they will speak to us for 5 or 6 minutes. And again, you know, your questions, just put them in the chat, and we will address them at the end of this. But before I do that, as I know that some of our new faculty members are also here, I want to specifically also shout out to them, particularly a couple of them may not be able to stay through the entire event. So in particular, I like for Professor Soren Eberhardt to show his face to us. He will be our instructor in the fall for the localization and terminology management, a buddy of our other instructor, Kalle DeFranco. Are you there, Soren? Hope you're still there.
I am, yes. I hope you can hear
Yeah.
me. And you can probably see that I'm sitting in a car. So
you want to introduce yourself briefly?
yes, thank you. My name is Soren Eberhardt. I'm working for Microsoft, and that's where I've been practicing localization the longest. Been in the industry for about 25 years. So I will be talking about localization, adapting well, digital products for local markets, and yeah, I've been doing that for a broad range of languages and a broad range of products as well. Very different things, from marketing websites to actually doing the first versions of Windows for languages like Inuktitut or Maori or Quechua or Zulu. So it's been a fun ride, and I love to share some of that knowledge and that expertise. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Soren. Thank you. It's great. I'm excited to have you come on board. Okay, some of you have met Professor Mena, Hermes Mena, but I'd like to give a shout to Hermes because will be joining us in the MATI program. So you want to briefly talk about the course, the consecutive interpreting, and Professor Mena teaches in Spanish and English, as some of you know. Go ahead, Hermes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Julie, and distinguished staff and students. My name is Hermes Mena. I'm a principal court interpreter for the city of New York. I'm a citywide supervisor of interpreting services for the city of New York, for family court in the city of New York. And I'm very excited to bring my experience in the field as well as my of over 20 years into the program, and to also work with the students to help them understand and meet the standards that are required in the field right now. So
Thank you, Hermes. And one more new faculty to Matty, Professor Jeff Xie. Professor Jeff Xie, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, Julie. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to this symposium. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to get to know everyone. I have been an interpreter and translator for so many years, working for government and international organizations, private sector, public sector. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to contribute my 2 cents into this highly renowned program. As Julie said, we're in a period of great transition. We're witnessing a huge impact, not just from COVID-19 or any other epidemics that might come in the future, but also from technology. I mean, nowadays we're witnessing the change of modalities of our working, and also the changing technology. A friend of mine who doesn't speak any foreign language visited Spain and stayed there for a whole month, carrying with him just a little translation machine. And nowadays, there's so many apps on our phone that can do an excellent job replacing, I would say, the necessity for some daily translation. So let's think about the future of our job. And also, there's so many platforms nowadays. So what are interpreters and translators going to be functioning like? Are we going to be future Uber drivers, Lyft drivers working for the platforms? Are we going to be replaced by machines? We don't know yet. So like I said, I have been working for the United Nations and stuff for so many years. I'm willing to contribute my experience to this program. So I will be working with students in the area of simultaneous interpretation. So my focus will be on conference interpretation. I will also touch upon consecutive, of course, because they are interrelated. Human beings are at this at a such a disadvantaged position when it comes to learning. Each individual have to accumulate his own knowledge. After so many years of training, we become fluent in knowledge, in skill, in attitude. But machines, when they have acquired certain skill, they have acquired it, and each and every machine is equally good. So let's face the threat. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
All right.
Thank you. All right. So we will without much ado, we will start our panel and inviting Dr. Darlene Chow to be our first speaker. Very quickly, of course, she is a giant in the field of Chinese teaching and translation, as a lot of us know. Dr. Chow is a professor and head of the Chinese division at Hunter College, as well as principal investigator and director for the Chinese flagship center project at Hunter College. Dr. Chow holds a PhD in applied linguistics from NYU, and she has taught and directed Chinese language programs for decades and produced numerous publications in the field. So, Darlene, if I could address this question to you, among your many accomplishments in the field of Chinese language education in the US, I understand that you're instrumental in advancing Chinese teaching and learning under the United States National Foreign Language Center's Star Talk program. If you could tell us a bit more about Star Talk and other such perhaps more recent initiatives that support the learning and teaching of Chinese as one of the 10 critical need languages. And of course, we say critical as identified in terms of national economic security interests. To what extent is translation and interpreting now part of this discussion? And for instance, within the classroom, is translation and interpreting used more as a tool now in the learning and teaching of Chinese? And beyond the classroom, particularly at the tertiary level, do you find nowadays that more students are thinking about jobs in translation and interpreting in addition to teaching?
Okay, thank you, Julie, for the introduction. And first of all, a big congratulations to the Translation Society for this event. And also, I'm so proud of my students, Annabella and Tanya, who graduated several years ago from our Chinese program. And, you know, it's nothing can make me more happier than seeing your students outstanding performance and stay focused and thinking about how to contribute to the not just to their own career but to the larger society. As a language teacher for my life, so yeah, I've been thinking about how to promote language instruction and learning, you know, constantly. And I think after listening to the presentations and the discussions, something came to my mind really quickly, which is how to make our younger generation to have the awareness of language service, you know, not only just being as a career, but as a, you know, accessibility and also equality issue. And in terms of language learning, I think it is important to have students focused on language learning and have a pipeline so that they can move from high school, say, to college, and then to the professional programs such as the translation and interpreting. This is especially true because Mandarin Chinese is considered a hard to learn language, you know, among the critical languages. And so I know that Annabella started her Chinese study while she was a high school student. And Tanya started from Hunter College, right? So freshman year. And so as you can see that even though Chinese is a difficult language, we have to tell people or to prove to people using our Hunter College Chinese flagship products to let them know that it is possible to acquire Chinese and reach to the high proficiency so that you can become a professional translator or interpreter. I would hope that the society could do some recruiting activities with the Chinese flagship so we can know now, not just tell them that, oh, you have a wonderful college program, but look, you can become a professional, you know, using your Chinese. And speaking of the opportunity to learn Chinese, you know, or Russian or Spanish at Hunter, I remember I came to Hunter in 1998, and before that, I used to teach at private institutions such as Princeton, Middlebury or Oberlin, you know, the minute I came to Hunter, I realized that there is a huge education resource gap between the private institutions and the public institutions. And I feel proud after working at Hunter for more than 20 years so far, that the public institutions really take the mission, you know, really seriously about offering opportunities or education, you know, quality education to people who are financially deprived or from the lower socioeconomic, you know, background. So that I think this is really something that we should be proud of, because we are you know, working together to you know, give this most precious education to all the students, regardless of their races, regardless of their colors, regardless of their you know, interests or anything. Because in this global education, you know, language studies is really important. But like Tanya said, you know, language learning is not being emphasized in K-12 curriculum. So we really need to speak up and hopefully that the federal government or the state Department of Education would consider like these languages, learning languages and teaching languages is really important. And also when students are in high school and college, they begin to think about career. So I think the opportunity to let students know what they can use, the skills to contribute to the society is important. So as we know that language learning can provide students with a competitive edge in career choices. And so, you know, as early as like high school students, I think, you know, connect them with this language learning, and not just to fulfill the foreign language requirement, but, you know, thinking this as a career path. So that's very important. And also, I remember Ken just mentioned about leverage. I think that is such an important concept to leverage. So for example, you know, if, you know, what makes a program important or thrive? I think the program needs to think about how to leverage what resource we have, and then provide more useful resources. For example, like Julie mentioned about the Star Talk program and the Chinese flagship program. These are federal funded programs focusing on providing opportunities and training for teachers for critical languages. So I know that it's you know, very difficult to run these programs during the COVID period. But at the same time, I can just report to you that our recruitment, our enrollment for this past year has been great. So I think, you know, during these difficult times, give people some time to think about, you know, really reflect on what they want to do, what they want to make their life more useful, more meaningful. And I think people would turn to languages either because of their language, you know, heritage background, or because they think that
the language skill really can help, especially in the New York City, where we can see that how important to have the language skill so that you can communicate to other people. And so I would like to just stop here. And I believe that the translation program, the master's program, the undergrad program, will be a bridge to the opportunities, to make the connections, to get people together. And we are very thankful to Julie for your design of the program and your leadership, and also our students' engagement. That is fabulous, because I've never seen a group like this, so vibrant, and each of you is so articulate, and also have high hopes, standards to what you're doing. And so really my congratulations, and we work together for this great program. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chow. So I think my personal takeaway, I don't know about you, right? From Derlin's talk, is that we kind of need to shift from thinking about the study of foreign languages in this country, which is of course famously known for its monolingualism, from the idea of studying foreign languages, in terms of a narrow utility, motivation, to looking at it as cultural capital, right? To looking at it as, from K to 12, at the level, at the elementary level, which is what's happening around the world, right? The way people actually commit to the study of English, the study of, major international languages from a young age, and then for us in the master's level, at the master's level as well as the bachelor's level, as a path towards these specific credentials, so that's something for us to work on, and to kind of a thought to hold. So I will now turn to Dr. Julia Guarnieri. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
Sorry. Mangling the Italian. And Julia, to introduce you, Julia is a professor of Italian at Bronx Community College. She's been working on literary translation studies for over 20 years, and in particular in the area of gender and identity in translation. Currently, she's also faculty development coordinator and an online teaching mentor of a writing intensive program for faculty. Julia, in our informal conversations, we often talked about how the demographic of students and their motivations for studying foreign languages have changed, including Italian. Of course, that differs from one language to another. So in your specialization, Italian, which is of course under the umbrella of Romance languages, could you elaborate quite simply what sorts of students pursue and thrive in languages such as Italian, in not exactly, a language that is a sort of evolving immigrant communities as such anymore in the United States. And I think there's some similarity there with Russian. And are the motivations different, or are they becoming more similar compared to those big so-called immigrant community languages such as Chinese and Spanish? And in terms of your own research in gender and translation, how has the notion of other language representation changed in this era of Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and an explosion of multilingual discourse around equity, social justice, and so forth.
Thank you, Julie, for the introduction and for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to get to know all of you and students and the faculty of the MATI program. So I just want to start by piggyback on what Dr. Chow was saying and Julie was saying about, changing the shift and starting language learning in high school. I can share that in Italy, I have my nieces, for example, they start foreign languages in kindergarten, basically, with songs or colors. And then they are required in many public high schools to study 2 foreign languages. That includes Chinese and Arabic. So not just the European languages. And then what they have in certain high schools, not all, but one of my nieces was in this track that they have this high school where they do 3 subjects in a second language. So whether it's Spanish, so my niece did it in Spanish. So they do math, biology, I know, completely in Spanish. So the level of language acquisition is very high. So when my niece finished high school, her level of Spanish, I mean, she could talk about cells in Spanish or different things. So the investment, I think, in European countries, maybe because of the proximity, but in the study of foreign language, as you mentioned, Julia, as a cultural capital, is very big. And unfortunately, I don't see this in the United States. We could talk about, that's a huge discussion. But anyways, going back to your question. So the students who study Italian are students who have a deep passion for Italy. The brand made in Italy, it's very hot, it's very strong. Still, I mean, Italy as a country exports, 36%. I mean, that between the imports and export, we have a huge exports of goods. And so Italian in business is actually very prominent as we speak. Between 2014 and 2019, exported many goods. So just recently before COVID, and when the country needs to sell that product abroad, the branding team and the marketing team need translators, need people who are able to do localization and transcreation, as Saul was describing, right, to sell that product. So Italian is a language very much used for business in this regard. And then I think also, as I said, Italy, the brand is very popular, has a lot of appeal, and a lot of students want to study in abroad. CUNY, the largest and the biggest program of study abroad within CUNY is Italy. The majority of students want to go to Italy, and because it has this appeal, whether it's through food or fashion or product good, right? So I think that's very important. I've had personally students who, musicologists, opera students, they want to learn the perfect diction. I had students who come from the archaeology field. I had students who, Italian is such a direct link with Latin, who maybe didn't have Latin in their college, who are taking Italian. Most of our students at Bronx Community College are heritage speakers of Spanish, and I think they feel such a similarity with the culture and the language. And so most of our classes are populated, I would say 80% by heritage speakers of Spanish. And Italian has been very, very popular in my own college. It's grown tremendously. And then within CUNY, it's a very large program. In terms of, the difference between Spanish and the other languages, I'm not sure why a student would decide eventually to take a class at the beginning as an undergraduate in a language or another. Sometimes it's heritage, sometimes it's a particular interest in a business or a political, event, or something that they have a particular interest in. I think also heritage plays a big part in that. We have some Italian American students. In terms of my research, I've been studying and working on language translation. I want to say, I don't know if Soren is still here. When I lived in Seattle, I did localization for Microsoft. So I do want to say that to him. So I worked on, I think, hand recognition at that time in the 90s. So in terms of gender in translation in particular, you know, with the feminist movement in the 60s and then in the 80s and the 90s, that's when really gender became on the map. And it was very important to start to translate female authors. And, you know, that began sort of the process. But then, you know, when I started to look in the 90s, that's when I started I've written several articles on how Italian novelists, especially I'm doing just modern contemporary Italian literature, was translated into English. That's a problem of gender became very apparent, where there's sort of what we call patriarchal translations, right? Where there's, you know, a misrepresentation of the female wording, or and where the female is stereotyped in translation into, you know, the very, very emotional or very expressive type, while the males are very composed and self-assertive, and you could see through the speech analysis that kind of language being translated. So we know that, you know, the feminist movement has also spearheaded a sort of an activism in translation. And I think today, to link to your question, Julie, is, you know, today a translator who we live in the, you know, Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, has to be an activist, has to ask themselves, what is my positionality? How do I, you know, pick up the work? Do I continue to, you know, carry on that stereotypization of the female character, or whether it's identity? For example, even there's a recent study on, and again, an Italian English translation of a gay character. And the researchers found that there was sort of a hormone normativity done, where the stereotype of what the gay man should sound like is then promulgated into the translation. So is the activist today should take a stance and be aware of perpetrating these stereotypes from language to language? Or should we be more active in taking a position, right? So these are the things that I've been working on. In particular, I worked on Italo Calvino translations, and I had the real pleasure and honor, just by luck, to when I was an undergraduate student, I wrote to William Weaver, who is he died in 2013. He translated basically Pasolini, all of Levi and Calvino, and all the major Italian literature at the time, Umberto Eco as well. And he, in the interview, I had the pleasure to interview him many times, and he revealed a lot of the translation process. And I started to ask him about some of his translation, which seemed very particular. For example, just give you one, there's a novel by Italo Calvino called If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler, in which there is a character of the reader, the male reader and the female reader. We know in Italian, Spanish, and French, we do have, you know, lettore and lettrice, we have that differentiation, but in English we don't. And so for the whole book, the female character is called, which is a very interesting translation, the other reader. So we have the reader and the other reader for the whole book. And
Wow.
You know, so that was something that, again, I was doing my undergraduate thesis, and that jumped out at me, and I had conversations with him about that translation. And so what that other means, right? And so then I started looking at all of his translations, and, you know, just to give you an example, and, you know, the whole world kind of opened up to see how, again, I'm talking about the 90s, okay, the sensitivity of today may be different, but how this problem really makes sometimes the translation even more sexist than in the Italian, right? The English translation. Again, I want to contextualize the times, but sometimes when I taught a translation course, I've asked the students to come up with a new translation. If you were to retranslate this book, how would you render in English you know, where the character has no name, it's just called the female reader, right? How would you do that? So I have a lot of very interesting suggestions from students. So this is sort of my field, and I'm just going to stop here. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Amazing. I was just thinking when you were saying about, how what gets translated, of course, right? What authors get translated. It's such a big deal. And certainly as far as the essentializing of the male voice, I was just thinking about how in Chinese literature, outside of China particularly, and even within China, right? But outside of China, hardly do you see any female writers being translated. I certainly can't think of one. Maybe if Professor Yong Ho is still here, he could reassure me that recently there may have been some prominent female writers being translated into English or into a European language for greater for a greater audience. But certainly that too, and also the stereotyping, and it applies, of course, to age as well, right? To the idea that certain languages are associated with, for example, with antiquity. So typically when we think of Chinese literature, we think of Confucius, think of something old, nothing modern, right? And that really, I think your research is really interesting. So, okay, thank you so much. We move on now to Hermes, Professor Mina. And of course, he's already introduced himself, so I won't, I think he needs no further introduction. But Hermes, I'd like to pose this question. When it comes to translation and interpreting in the U.S., and you obviously you are interpreting is your big piece here. Spanish looms very large, with so many areas of need. So based on your work over the last 20 years or more in the court system, what do you think are the greatest challenges for interpreters and for the client institutions that hire interpreters? Could you address some challenges that are specific to Spanish, as well as those that you believe are unique to to court interpreting across different languages? What is the role of formal education, of programs such as ours, as far as addressing these challenges that are specific to interpreting?
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to start by answering your latter question and sort of to add some optimism. I'm very optimistic about this field. And, I always check the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay. I always go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to look at the projection of code interpreting and translation. And it says that they expect a 20% growth from 2019 to 2029. I don't know if those figures are being revised because of COVID, but the truth of the matter is this is a profession that is growing and that is advancing and that is at the avant-garde of sort of at the core of the transformation the world is enduring. And something that the Bureau indicate is that this is driven by attention to globalization, and also to the increased number of non-English speakers who are coming to the United States, or migrating to the United States. And that brings me to a few things. Also, as the speakers mentioned before, the importance of the 3 tracks that of MATI in the world out there, like especially how important is Spanish and Mandarin in the commercial sector, being the two great trading partners of the United States. And now, Mexico's also Mexico, Canada, and the United States, their free trade agreement creates a plethora of opportunities for Spanish speakers, let alone the fact of, the people who've been migrating into the United States, Spanish speakers from Central America. And, if Biden gets to pass his promised legislation of immigration reform, and those people get to be legalized, they will immediately be giving access to rights, to services, and they will interpreters and translators will be needed to bridge this gap and facilitate the access to these services to this community. And I think this is something that we are looking for. You know, I work in the courts, and I see that the trend is usually, you know, advocates start mobilizing, then advocates put pressure on politicians and the legislatures, and the legislatures, you know, create laws, pass laws that force the mandates the institutions such as hospitals, such as the government at the city level, as well as at the state level, which is where my field, to to implement language access and language rights for the core users and for the public that then that avail themselves of our services. So some of the challenges that institutionally we are facing is that oftentimes, especially in the code interpreting is very specific, because code interpreter entails language conservation. Code interpreter specialist needs to have a translator or interpreter needs to have dual language equivalency. And that's one of the hardest issues. And maybe would be my encouraging word to the students. Yes, Hunter, we don't have as many resources as other private private institutions, what I have taught, but the student body has such a drive, such a desire to learn. And now with the advance of technology, it's so easy to, devote ourselves to, and to apply ourselves into honing those pair of working language skills to make them equivalent. So once we achieve that, we can overcome the challenge of machine translation, which is still, it's not all there, because especially when we are working with clients and we're working with the public we serve, the human nuance is very important, and that's why we as service providers prefer the human element over a Google translation or over a machine translation. So what I see, at least in the immediate decade, is that yes, the technology will be used to enhance the profession, but the professionals themselves will be the one at the front line, interpreters and translators, at least in the legal setting, and I am sure probably as well as in the medical setting, will be at the front, or what they call community interpreting, providing that service to the community. Because as one of the speakers mentioned before, we're not only language advocates, we're not only conserve a message and faithfully and accurately render it from source language into target language, we are also cultural dividers, cultural brokers. And and sometimes our input, I would say more so in the medical field than in the legal field, because there are very strong constraints in the medical, in the legal. But that cultural expertise is also very important, and that human element as well. That's irreplaceable. You can't replace that. So I would say that our tracks are very important. China, Russia, and the Spanish-speaking worlds are very prominent in the world today. And in the commercial area, in this national security area, those tracks are going to be of great value. So you know, something, and I'll close with this, something that is important too is to identify subfields within the profession. Something, for instance, that we've been trying to find is translators with expertise in plain language, plain English language, so that we're trying to make our CNH in the courts more easily understandable by all readers, and move away from sort of the frozen and archaic English jargon of the legal profession, and replace that without changing the meaning by sort of an English, a plain English language. And the same thing applies to Spanish. We're aiming at sort of looking for those professionals who have trained expertise in a standardized Spanish. So they're able to find the words who can be easily understood by the Spanish speakers of the Caribbean, North America, Mexico, and Central American region, as well as by those from South America. So if you are able to find those little niches within the field, that enhances your value as a, as a translator as well as an interpreter.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hermes. Yeah, actually, find that niche, right? It's like nowadays, actually, as Mandarin becomes so important, right? My little corner has become Cantonese, so that's my little niche, especially when it comes to food. So I get those jobs. So
Well,
anyway, yes, and I think my other takeaway, speaking as an interpreter myself, is indeed that human element. I think is the immediacy, and the dynamism of oral communication, right, is something that kind of puts interpreting it, out as a completely different beast. So thank you. This is so interesting how we move from one space to another, right? So now we will have Dr. Peterson, Nadia Peterson. She is the head of the Russian and Slavic Studies program at Hunter College. She holds a PhD in Russian literature from Indiana University, and is a published translator who started the Hunter translation program in Russian some 20 years ago, right?
Yes.
So, yes, Nadia. So, Russian is really interesting to me because I see it as sort of it's way understated, and off focus, and so actually, I find this to be kind of deceptive, right? We don't think too much about it except when Trump goes on about Putin.
Well, there were times in American history when everybody was thinking quite a lot about Russia and money was pouring in to the study of languages and politics, and then something happened. I guess perhaps the government thought that since the Soviet Union fell apart, it was a danger, and they didn't need to put in resources to acquaint those who communicated with the government in the relevant issues. But Russian is extremely important, and we're trying to do everything on our part to emphasize that notion. I wanted to tell everybody that I arrived at Hunter at the same time as Dr. Chow. We came in 98. And just like Darlene, I was coming from quite a different environment. I taught at Princeton and the University of Pennsylvania, and I was completely amazed by the linguistic and cultural diversity of Hunter. And of course, it's still the case. And I think that makes us very, very special. And that is why a creation of a translation society is such a big deal, because you're pulling from the enormous richness of Hunter and CUNY in your work. And I want to congratulate the participants, the students, and Director Julie Tay for pulling it off and so quickly and brilliantly. Another story that I need to tell you is that how the translation program started in Russian at Hunter. At that time, the City University of New York had a special program for police officers. Maybe Kenneth knows about it a little bit. We were supposed to go and prepare materials for police officers who worked in Russian-speaking areas and Spanish-speaking areas and Chinese-speaking areas, so that they could say hands down or hands up or drop your guns correctly. And so the diversity of our students and the obvious need for competency in these languages prompted me to start the program in translation, and the demand was immediate. initially, we focused on elementary translation, then literary translation, but we tried to touch upon various aspects of translation that could be useful to students. One thing that I know about our Hunter students is that they're very practical. And when they start doing something, such as learning a language, they always ask, what can I do with this language? So that led to, in consultation with Maria Cornelio, who is the star of the Spanish translation program, to our major in Russian translation. And we thought that making it obvious to students that this was not necessarily only at all literary translation, which of course we love, but it has a narrow niche in professional life, that it has to be a pre-professional major. So students are still, because we do still have this major, being trained to find a job with the language. So as part of that major, we have internships. And when we were building up the list of possible internships, we rediscovered, of course, I discovered that with the police department, rediscovered the fact that the need for people who know Russian in this city is enormous. So we could place, and still placing, our undergraduate students in internships in hospitals, healthcare facilities, courts, immigration, and Dr. Chow had a wonderful course on translation. I think it was 2 years ago, global workforce. It was crafted as global languages for global workforce. And her students went to give lectures to tourists. So in museums, libraries, and galleries, there is an enormous need for our services as translators. One thing that I wish in my personal journey in translation is that I had is the preparation that you're having now on the next level, because after we had those majors put in place, the Spanish program and the Chinese program and the Russian program got together and proposed MATI. And now you're all part of that wonderful program. And there was another issue that I wanted to raise in this regard. And that is, addressing the question that Julie posed about sort of the invisibility, relative invisibility of Russian. Perhaps this is, well, not perhaps, definitely something needs to be addressed. But we do have immigrants from Russia, from the former Soviet Union, and their basic language is Russian. So even though they come from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, or other such former republics, they communicate in Russian. So we do have a lot of, you all will have a lot of potential clients.
Nadia, perhaps you could comment briefly, what do you see in terms of the global economy, in terms of how this profession is evolving increasingly into a very much a remote and portable, highly portable nature of work that we do, particularly, as you know, there's so much work out there for localization in the virtual space. So how do you see the prospect of, of Russian English translation beyond services to immigrant speakers in the global sphere, you know, perhaps in the arts, you know, digital consumption of games and such.
As important as in Chinese and Spanish globally, absolutely. Because again, also in the former countries of the Soviet bloc,
Right.
a lot of people still speak Russian, quite a lot of people. And then, you know, we're living in a global village, so everything that is brand new in America in terms of, I don't know, shoes, clothes, fashions, and so on, has to be instantly and is instantly sold to the Russians or Russian-speaking people, and those have to be done in the proper way. And those approaches to localization have to be used. So one of the speakers was talking about the importance of 3 languages, and Russian is one of them. And I want to also, this is what I wanted to say also in terms of the society. And Dr. Chow talked about it, other speakers talked about it, and Julie mentioned it as well, that the word was engagement. And then another important idea, which I totally support, is going to high schools. And we do have high schools in this city which have these languages taught. So recruiting from there and perhaps spreading your reach to junior colleges and to certainly to our undergraduates.
Okay. Thank you, Nadia. So yes, this is a good point to turn over to Michael Rowland. Professor Rowland teaches the Spanish-English translation. Some of you have already met him here at Hunter, and both at the BA and MA level. And he serves as the faculty advisor for the Spanish translation students this semester. He has worked in translation in various capacities, including as project manager and as quality reviewer and assessor. He is a PhD candidate in Hispanic linguistics at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he's writing his PhD, his dissertation on language ideologies in the instruction of Spanish as a heritage language. So, Michael, just picking up from this last point, right? And as you know, I'm also doing research in linguistics and in critical linguistics and ideology. So it's interesting how when you think about a language like Russian and I think also certainly Italian, language could be a matter of choice, which is what we keep we think of as professional translators. We're out there, we can choose, right, how to hone our languages and how to service these languages. And particularly when we service a language, you think of it as a matter of utility, as a matter of need, because you have 2 monolingual parties that need our bridge, right? But it is, of course, it is now trending toward language as choice. Language is something that adds to the swag of, okay, you're in the Russian diaspora, you just enjoy, doing things in Russian, right? So, and I wonder if, if you could, in terms of your research, you could comment on that, how that works out in Spanish as we put that in the world map, right, beyond the United States. And then, of course, right, contrasting that with the frontline work, the day-to-day work, and challenges of translators and interpreters here in the U.S. in Spanish.
Sure. Yeah, that's really fascinating. This is a great advantage, I guess, of coming towards the end of the faculty panel, is that there's already been so much that's been brought up. I have a little card with like many points that that other speakers have brought up that I'd love to try and touch on, but we'll see how much we even can get to. Before I forget, though, I would like to thank the students who've organized this this panel, this event today. I think it's been really fascinating and wonderful to just hear about everybody's different perspectives and the directions that the students want things to go, and to maybe share my little piece of it. So thank you to the students and to Julie and to the other faculty presenters who are here to share their perspectives. In response to what you just were mentioning, Julie, in terms of you know, I do. My perspective on language that where I've come to it has, you know, always come from a question of identity. Okay, so language and identity are at the center of the work that I do, and you know, thinking critically about those questions. There are so many overlaps between what other people here have mentioned. My ethnic background, although you wouldn't know it from my name or to look at me, is more Italian than anything else. And so I started with my engagement with modern languages by studying Italian, which is the language that my mother's family mostly lost over the course of a couple of generations. And so that was one of the main entry points for me. And then I began to see and think about parallels between the immigrant or heritage background in Italian that I came from, and then seeing parallels between that and Spanish and more recent histories of migration that many Spanish speakers have in the U.S. And now I understand, so much more about how that is the case with every group, where you have, people of Russian-speaking background and Chinese-speaking background. And so, what I guess I see with that, and how my research is intersecting with what I'm doing here, is I'm seeing a real need to approach language and translation and the professionalization of language skills from a critical perspective. You can be highly proficient in a language and not necessarily adopt a critical perspective on what it means to be a speaker of that language, or to interpret effectively between those languages, or to translate, to mediate culturally between them. So I think that there's a huge opportunity to encourage people who work in the translation and interpretation fields to think about their own positionality, their own point of view, and also on the kind of language that they're putting out into the world. And so when I think about language ideologies, and my dissertation project is on the instruction of Spanish as a heritage language, and I'm thinking about a lot of questions related to normativity, but also to monolingual biases, even within the language communities. And for heritage speakers, this is an important issue, and it's one that comes up quite a bit in the courses that I teach as well, at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. Most of my students, I would say, are heritage speakers of Spanish, or they are people who maybe migrated themselves but have been in the United States for a really long time at this point, on in the scale of decades in some cases. And they're people who are coming back to school at a slightly more advanced stage, and they have a ton of experience with the languages, but they don't have the degree, or they don't have the title, etc. So I think that they have many of the speakers of Spanish and Chinese and Russian, and surely that extends to Bengali and Arabic, and all of the languages that are represented, among large immigrant communities in New York in particular, everybody has this, bilingual, a perspective of sort of a long established bilingualism, and that has affected the language itself. And so I'm interested in how we can increase the representation and the legitimacy both of bilingual speakers and of the bilingual varieties of the language that have evolved along with them. And so I think that this is of a piece with the shift that Professor Chow mentioned and that Julie highlighted afterwards, from narrow utility to cultural capital. So this is when I said you can be, highly proficient in a language without understanding necessarily all of the cultural nuances that go along with the context that you're working in or translating for. And I think that is an important part of what we need to do going forward in the translation and interpretation field, both as an academic field and professionally. I think that that's going to be important for people who are working in the field to be more and more aware of that. More and more often, we're going to be writing and translating not only for or interpreting not only for you're never really doing that, or rarely in the US context are you doing that for a monolingual speaker of your target language who lives abroad. You're doing a lot of that for people who live in bilingual contexts, who already have some contact, with English. And so I think that, ideology and activism are extremely important things to keep in mind as we're practicing and teaching and learning and reflecting on translation and interpretation. There's no view from nowhere. There is no neutrality per se, and so you really have to. I think it's important for translators and interpreters to reflect on what their point of view is, what is their identity, what are the things that they're prioritizing in translation and interpretation, and in their language usage in general, and then how can that intersect, and how can and should and must that impact on the work that they're doing when they make choices about language specifically, and also about about the context that they work in and the projects that they take on, and how those impact the communities. And there was one other thing that largely developed, I think, in the chat that I wanted to mention, which was that there was the mention of technology. And of course, I think there's always this fear, and has been for quite, the time that I've been involved in the language services industry or world, or and that stretches back over a decade now, is that technology is going to, how is technology going to affect what we do? Is it going to make us obsolete? And I've been fairly engaged with technology in this area, and I have seen impacts and changes on it. Certainly, I have some good friends who are Chinese English translators, and they had a hard time a couple of years ago, I think, because it seemed like just the way that the work was being done was changing a lot, and I think it was hard to keep up with. But then we also see the great research that Sol, who's one of my students, and was also in the undergraduate program as well, and really a standout in both programs. I think the great information that Sol found, which was that that U.S. News and World Report says that translation and interpretation is the number one creative and media occupation this year, or in the coming year, or was last year. In any case, whatever the context was, and I think that there still are many opportunities, and will continue to be great growth in this field, but we do need to engage with and embrace and learn to effectively use technology for ourselves in what we work on, and be also critical of the developments in language related technology, computational linguistics, etc. And I think that the thing that we as human translators will always be able to do better, or interpreters better than a machine can, is to bring the cultural context. I don't think that computers yet, and probably for a long time, will be able to keep up with all of the nuances of culture and of human identity and the needs that we have that are related to that. And so
Okay.
I guess
Sorry,
that's my
Michael.
perspective. So thank you.
Sorry, yeah, we're kind of out of time. This is really great. I think it's also a very good point for me to turn to Professor Savova. And a quick introduction, and I will get to the question. Professor Savova, she holds a PhD in English linguistics and translation studies, and is currently adjunct professor with us with the MATI program, teaching translation theory. Prior to that, she was the clinical professor and head of the Department of Foreign Languages and Translation at NYU, the School of Professional Studies. She's also a lifelong translator and interpreter working in Bulgarian and English. So a very good point for me to pick up with you, Milena, is this tension between professionalization and critical perspectives. And obviously, in the world that we're in, and students come in needing to work on translation and or interpreting or both, so that they can get jobs and be successful economically. At the same time, critical perspective is something else that demands of translators and interpreters to step up, to advocate, to speak for often for those with a lesser and weaker voice. So how do you see our academic the academia and the field of professional translation as such? How do you see us preparing students to be translators and interpreters in the 21st century? In other words, what is the essence of a good education for professional translators and interpreters today?
Thank you, Julie. Congratulations once again to the society. And I think today's discussion is a very good indicator of how timely this society is, because it's been fascinating. One point I want to follow up on of Professor Chow's presentation is when I was at NYU and was talking to professors at programs around the country, mostly foreign language departments, an issue that came up and that everybody recognized was that when faculty talk to students, foreign language majors, usually what comes up and what they highlight as a profession, as the future profession of foreign language majors, is teaching. Apart, of course, from the cultural enrichment that students also take languages for, but almost nobody pointed out translation and interpreting as a future career path. Now, I don't know, maybe you guys here at Hunter do that, but that should really be highlighted alongside teaching as a future career path, which you have these concentrations here in some departments, which is already, a possibility, but the translation and interpreting are future career paths for foreign language majors, and that point should be made very clear to undergraduate students. Now, to the points that Julie made, we've come a long way from the 90s when people were still asking the question whether they needed any training, any certification to be translators and interpreters. And thank God nobody asked that question anymore. This program that I think that Hunter has started is really a huge step forward in the city and probably nationally. And the fact that you guys were forced to put it online due to COVID, I think is actually a benefit to the program, because you have the potential to really draw students and faculty from all over the country. You know, this is master's programs are kind of short, 2 or 3 semesters, and the big question is what to pick and choose and give students, because there's so much novice new translators need to know when they join the field, because clients are demanding nowadays, translation agencies are demanding, deadlines with the advent of computers, deadlines have become and are becoming tighter and tighter. Translators need to jump into multilingual projects right away. Nobody cuts you any slack anymore. You know, you sink or swim. If you don't make it, nobody will call you anymore. I don't want to frighten anybody, but that's really the reality. So we need to really make very critical decisions about how best to teach our students, and yet we cannot give them everything. That's clear. So we need to, the best thing is to give them the tools for them to learn on their own and start learning on their own while they're still students. I was hugely impressed by our student panelists today. And I was proud because they've, you know, they presented knowledge and skills that they didn't learn in the classroom. So they're doing a lot on their own. What we, you know, we need to give them specific translation skills and strategies on approaching projects, on translating between the 2 languages and the 2 cultures, on ethics, on meeting deadlines, on terminology, on decision making, making the right decisions, because translators can always produce good translators, expert translators. They can always produce more than 1 version. And how do you choose which version to submit to the client? That's a very big question for the translator. Then another issue is you go out there and do some research online or even in paper dictionaries, which we use less and less, but still sometimes we do. Which source should you trust? How do you decide which sources are more trustworthy than others? Especially if when you go to do research, you research issues or items that you're not familiar with. You don't research the things you know about. So how do you make those decisions? Whom to trust? We trust to trust. In the World Wide Web, it's a free for all. So we need to show them the paths. We need to we need to build confidence in them that that when they complete this program, they will have acquired a good foundation, good skills, in order to move forward and to be successful in the professional world. Regarding interpreting, you know, translation and interpreting were, you know, were impacted by COVID. I don't know if Ken Lowe is still here, and he could speak to translation more than I can, because I have some information from him last summer. they were under assault from a huge volume of translation work on very, very short turnaround time. And they turned to agencies and to, I think, individual translators also, and not only in the common languages, but in the languages of lesser distribution, because you know, the city needed to distribute information to all residents of the city about COVID on very short notice. So I know that they were under enormous pressure now, and that was unprecedented, of course. So that effort may not happen again very soon, and I don't know if the pressure has probably lessened a little bit now. He could speak to that perhaps, but the impact that COVID has had on interpreting, I think, is there to stay, because remote interpreting, of course, everybody's been working remotely. Now the courts will probably go back to brick and mortar buildings, and court interpreting may go back to what it was. Medical interpreting, remote interpreting had entered the sphere of medical interpreting even before, and that may continue. But I think that conference interpreting will start utilizing remote interpreting more, because that will drive down the cost of conference organizing. And there are all sorts of conferences, bigger ones, smaller ones. So I would suggest that a program like ours would have to introduce some modules or whatever to train students in remote interpreting. Well, maybe it's being done now because of the way the program is taught, but I think remote interpreting will be a very important skill for students to learn, to acquire in the future. And of course, CAT tools is very important, and because every translator nowadays have to list their computer skills in their resume. Now, one last, I know we're running out of time. One last thought I have, because I've always been interested in languages of lesser distribution. There has been in the last 25 years, there's been a growth of university programs around the country in translation and interpreting, which is a positive development. But most of the programs have been in Spanish. We've got to face that. And what happens with all the other languages? Okay, we here have Russian and Chinese, fantastic, but there are many other languages. So I was just thinking that perhaps Hunter can take the lead as a public institution, and you have this good foundation, this good model, and perhaps Hunter can develop some short courses, maybe even 40 hours, and give them some credit, like non-matriculated 1 credit, 2 credit courses of 2 modules, or 1 or 2 modules, something like that, a generic module, and then with language experts, and admit people with really languages of lesser distribution. Because I think clients and translation agencies would really welcome that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. Yes, indeed, yes. But I'd like to say, as a first thing, a bit of news is that I've already put in a proposal, a part of this year's curriculum revision proposal for this program to admit students of other languages. So that is a good start. And the way we would do it structurally, we will not start them as tracks as such, but rather to bring students in who are interested in translation, and we will work with supporting language specific faculty in the classroom for the lesser languages. So that is actually happening, and we have a couple of students in Arabic who are interested and have already taken a couple courses with us. And I think I have a student of Italian who is in this event. If he's still here, can't see everyone, but yeah. So things are happening. So that is great. And yes, and thank you all for sticking around. Although we're running way over time, I'll turn this back to Rachel to close off. Thank you very much, members of the panel, of the faculty panel.
No, thank you so much for this amazing faculty panel, which I really enjoy hearing you all, like Professor Roland and Professor Savova, both my professors. And I love hearing your knowledge and your opinions and your points of view, which motivate me just to keep on going and just to keep on hearing from you and just get some knowledge, you know. I will also I would like to say, like, personal thing to Julia. I love the points that you brought up, like gender and the point of view from Europe. Like I was born and raised in Europe. I was born and raised in Spain, and I know what you talk about when you say like we have these just learning a second language from an early age, you know. This is so important. It's very rich. It's true. Everything that she said, it was true, and I love it because it just, I could say that right now I could learn Latin, I could learn Greek, I could learn English, I could learn French. You know, it's beautiful, and it just makes you feel completed as a person. I feel complete. The more I know about languages, the more complete I feel. So yeah, I would like also to see if there is any questions for the faculty panel. Well, everybody's saying that great ideas, Milana, Professor Topova, great, wonderful panel. Everybody is just saying that they loved it. I'm really happy that this could happen and we are all together here, that we can just share our ideas. I cannot pin us all. I cannot have it as in the main here. So I'm just gonna say thank you again, and you're gonna receive an email with a event feedback link where you can just give us your points of view, what you thought about the panel, the symposium, what would you like to see in the future, if there is anything that we can improve, if there is any ideas, just whatever it is, they will be welcome. I'm gonna also put it on the chat, so you can do it now, but you will be receiving this email soon, probably on Monday. And thank you so much for everything. And if any of my colleagues want to say something, I will be happy to hear it.
I also want to thank you for Dr. Savova for talking about, I think it's such a good idea to have this maybe certificates that sort of to bring in other languages at the beginning, instead of saying, okay, I have to do a master of 2 years, you know, maybe they can just, like you were suggesting, creating smaller tracks or certificates. I don't know what kind of denomination that would be, but that would allow other students who are already doing something else to maybe come in the program and see what it offers and get a micro specialization in something, you know, if they want to perhaps do literary translation or localization or whatever the program offers. I think that's a very good idea.
I just want to remind you that any questions, any further questions, requests, and everything, we have our email of the Hunter Translation Society. Any questions be answered by us. If you need further help, like Julie or anything, we will give you the contact. So we'll be happy to hear from you from now on, and stay in contact, in touch, and just keep building this amazing community bigger and bigger, which we are really excited to see happening in the future. And just see you in the MATI program as well, like for future students. Please just do it. It's really enriching.
Does anyone else have any questions for the faculty or the MATI program? I know, I'm sure everyone is hungry. It's been a long, great, wonderful, stimulating conversation, but
Thank you so much. Thank you to
everyone for
all the
coming.
students. Thank you to the Executive Committee of the Translation Society. And once again, congratulations.
Yes.
And
Thank
thank you,
you.
my dear colleagues. Thank you, students. Thank you, colleagues, for coming.
Bye.
Have a
Goodbye.
nice day. Bye.
Thank you to
Bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.